Can't find any use for us alive, not knowing we can't die. So while they're chasing blood, snatching bodies, eating babies, and raping our minds for having sex with all kinds, they can only become us. With every thrust I trust, they only raise our army, and I trust that we are righteous.
Good evening. Good evening. I'm so glad that you're all here. My name is Kali Holloway. Thank you for joining us tonight. We are thrilled to be celebrating the release of Say Her Name, Black Women's Stories of Police Violence and Public Service by Kimberlé Crenshaw. So this book builds on our Say Her Name campaign, which launched in 2014, and it centers, finally, the experiences of Black women with state-backed violence and police brutality. Through art, storytelling, highlighting the testimonies in the book, and the rituals that we have cultivated, we uplift the names of Black women, girls, and femmes whose lives have been stolen from us. The poem that you just heard, titled The Vampire Theory, was written by Corinne Gaines, who was killed by police on August 1st, 2016, in Maryland. Corinne was shot by a police officer through a wall in her home while she was making a sandwich, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for her 5-year-old son. A common thread that you'll hear in a lot of these stories, and it comes up again and again in our conversation today, is how motherhood is never a protective shield against police violence for Black women. How our children are never protected from the horror of our deaths. We are essentially seen as killable. We see this with the recent killing of 21-year-old Takaya Young in Ohio. She was a pregnant mother of 2 kids. She was shot by a police officer through the windshield of her car. And we see this sadly in the case of Miriam Carey, who was killed 10 years ago, not far from where we're standing right now. On October 3rd, 2013, Miriam Carey drove through a police checkpoint that wasn't clearly marked here in Washington, D.C., with her 1-year-old daughter in the back of the car. Within just 7 minutes, 6 Secret Service agents fired 8 rounds into her car, and 2 Capitol officers shot another 9 rounds into the car. Miriam was declared dead shortly after arriving at the hospital. Her young daughter wasn't hurt, but I just want to be clear that Miriam didn't fire any shots and she did not have a gun in the car. Here to read an excerpt from the book, in the words of Valarie Carey, Miriam's sister, please welcome Andrea Harris Smith.
My name is Valarie Carey. I'm the sister of Miriam Carey, and I'm a part of the Say Her Name Mothers Network. Miriam was a beautiful girl, a beautiful young lady. She wanted to be successful in life, and as she got older, she decided to go into the field of health, and she became a registered dental hygienist. I'm actually older than Miriam by 7 years, so there's a gap. I remember when she was a baby because she was so round and chubby, my father nicknamed her Butterball. And I guess my favorite memories really started to develop when she got older and when we would actually hang out more. That was my little sister. But I would say my most favorite memory, which resonates every year when I release butterflies in my sister's honor, was when we went to Niagara Falls. So I love butterflies. And Miriam decided we should all go up to Niagara Falls for Memorial Day weekend. I think that was 2007, around that time. So, 2 carloads, we go up to Niagara Falls. And we went to a butterfly conservatory at my request. And the butterflies just kept landing on my sisters, Amy and Miriam. And I took some beautiful shots of them. And that was one of my favorite moments. And I held on to that after she was killed, just to remember her smile and how she lived her life, as opposed to how horrifically we lost her. So, the day that Miriam was killed, it was a Thursday. October 3rd, 2013. I think it was a Thursday. I was in my office preparing for an event I was hosting that evening with Terry Williams. And so I was really just trying to get my thoughts together, what I was going to say. And I'm sitting at my desk, my laptop's open, and I use AOL. And so I saw on the main page there was a blurb about something happening in DC. I didn't click on it because I was busy. I was in my zone. And I had a TV at the time in my office and I didn't have it on. And then my phone started to ring. It was a little after 2. My phone just started ringing incessantly from different phone numbers. A lot of the numbers I now know were coming from the DC area. I actually picked up one of the calls because it was a Connecticut area code number. And at the time, my sister was living in Connecticut. She had just recently moved there and purchased a co-op. And so I answered the call because I thought maybe it's my sister. I didn't know why all these calls were coming through, but they weren't registered in my phone, so I wasn't going to answer it. And when I answered this one particular call, there was a man on the other line. He was a reporter. He asked to speak to me, and then he started asking me questions about Miriam. What type of car did she drive? Did I know where she was at? And I just stopped and said, I'm not sure where this line of questioning was going, but before I could finish, he said, well, apparently you haven't been watching the news. I need you to turn on your TV to CNN. And then I turned on the news. I saw what looked to be my sister's car. I saw what looked to be my niece being held by an officer. And there was a footer that read, suspect killed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for reading that powerful story of Valarie's love, loss, survival, and remembrance. We honor the story of Miriam and will continue to uplift her name and aspirations. Valarie Carey, Miriam's sister, and a valued member of the Say Her Name Mothers Network, is going to be joining us later tonight for a conversation. In the meantime, please welcome AAPF artist and resident Gina Loring, who will share her poem, Say Her Name. She'll be followed by Margaret Odette, who will read an excerpt from the Kimberlé Crenshaw book, Say Her Name.
Good evening. Her heart beats in realms you cannot see. These fleshy, fragile suits are but vessels. You can't box up the sun or hold the Milky Way hostage, can't capture the wind, chain something as elusive as sound. Her name is written in the ridges of your palm, hidden beneath your first waking breath. She is in the sky, in sunsets, golden violets and blues, in the clouds, in the waves. Her name is written there, too. Her womb, the cradle of civilization. Akashic records trace it back. Everyone is black. Do you not hear the wind testify? We made you possible. And what have you become? What have you done? Strayed so far from your own humanity, you can't see ours. What God do you pray to? What laws do you live by? Are you not ashamed to breathe, having stolen so much breath, karmic debt, almost beyond repair? Who dares such barbarity? Violence as generational practice as tradition. Violence as generational practice as tradition. Violence as generational practice as tradition. Such sins are cancerous to the collective soul, and we are all connected to the whole. You violate the most sacred. Carriers of light, divine feminine, we are the moon, we are life. What upside down world did you create to take the sanctity of our bodies and make it a thing? The blessing of our skin and make it wrong, when all along we are built by divine design. You are haunted by your own doing. Some sick sibling rivalry, you hate us, but wanna beat us. No booty lift, lip injection, tanning salon can give you soul. No redemption, no extension can be bought with silver or gold. Just say her name. The constellations spell it out. Say her name. It's your passport to freedom, your only route. Repent, confess, stole our bodies, our culture, the shoulders we stand on, but the ancestor spirits are not for sale. Our regality and resilience are not for your taking. Every peak and valley, her name is shaking. It echoes out from that core, it echoes out from that core, it echoes out from that core. She is both after and before. She is both after and before the very earth you walk on. The air in your lungs, the rhythm of your breath. Say her name. That's all that will be left when you are called to judgment, stripped to ash and bone. Say her name. That's your only way home. Thank you.
Since their arrival on American shores, Black women have lived lives on the whims of others. As a group, Black women have been essential to the American project. Their reproductive labor under a system of coercive childbearing, otherwise known as enslavement, is the but-for condition of possibility for the wealth that underwrote the American economy. Thus, while Black women's presence was indisputably essential to the various racial projects on which this nation was founded, Black women's lives have been expendable. That history of Black women's subordination continues to be stolen in the silences around their ongoing exposure to private and state violence. Over time, the foundational failure to acknowledge Black women's experience has created many distortions and contradictions of Black women, first and foremost, but also in our understanding of not only racism and sexism, but also the dominant narrative of the American nation's founding and consolidation. These distortions have not gone unchallenged. Over the centuries that this regime of denial has taken root, Black feminists have powerfully contested and interrogated the terms of Black women's erasure from the nation's official histories. Hashtag Say Her Name is one in a lineage of efforts both past and present that endeavor to make this paradox visible. The movement tackles head-on the most egregious and devastating outcome of this denial. A nation that owes its very existence in large part to Black women does precious little to protect them from the forces, both public and private, that have punished and killed them. Hashtag Say Her Name draws sustained attention to the physical and material vulnerabilities that underlie Black women's marginalization by memorializing and continuing the work of Black women in Black freedom struggle. Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, and legions of other women who fought white supremacy fashioned an organically intersectional anti-racism that confronted the gendered particulars of anti-Black violence. I have tried to capture the relationship between Black women's history and the very foundation of this nation in many ways and many contexts, including through respect, a spoken word poem. I wrote this piece for a special performance of Eve Ensler's Vagina Monologues and performed it at the Apollo Theater in Harlem at a benefit for domestic violence shelters and rape crisis centers serving Black and Latinx women in New York. Black vaginas. The hardest working vaginas in America. And still they get no respect. No vagina has done so much for this country and received so little. Really. Black vaginas built this country. It all started right here. Between blueberry black, chocolate cream, honey brown, praline, pecan, French vanilla lace. It wasn't the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, or the Stars and Stripes that gave birth to America. It was the black vagina that laid the golden egg, or rather, the chattel slaves. Thank you.
So I just want to again thank you all for coming out this evening to share in these words and be part of this series. To talk a little bit about the Say Her Name Mothers Network, just explain the work that it does. It is a community of mothers and family members of Black women, girls, and femmes who've been killed by police. And it provides support to other mothers and family members who've also been victimized. This community is, in many ways, a sisterhood of sorrow. They lean on one another for healing and support in what is otherwise a very isolating experience. It's through the solidarity and support and understanding that they can also come together to laugh, to have moments of joy, and to continue to advocate for change in law enforcement and in communities across the nation. On August 1st, 2016, in Randallstown, Maryland, Baltimore County Police entered 23-year-old mother Corinne Gaines' home regarding a traffic stop. Gaines said that the traffic stop, which had happened on a prior date, had been traumatic and had ultimately led to the miscarriage of two twins that she was carrying. She recorded the interaction from her apartment that she had with the cops that were at the door outside and posted some of it live on social media. The officers fired into Corinne's home, killing her, injuring her 5-year-old son, who she was holding at the time she was shot. A jury later awarded Gaines' family a settlement for wrongful death. That award was overturned by a judge but reinstated on appeal. To read the words of Rhanda Dormeus, Corinne's mother, please welcome Kim Yancey.
My name is Rhanda Dormeus. Corinne was my 23-year-old baby. Oh, she was a very, very feisty young lady from toddlerhood. Very outspoken, kind of bossy at times. She was just matter of fact. Growing up, she did very well in school and excelled in all her classes. She went to a college prep high school called Baltimore City College High School, and she was interested in political science. But during her senior year, she lost interest in political science because there were so many things going on in society that contradicted what she was being taught. Now, I think that was the beginning of her starting to reach out and learn more about the government outside of what was made available through the media. She wanted to go behind the scenes and do her own research. Oh, she was an avid reader. Oh my God, I could buy this girl 10 books in a week and she would go through them. She read urban novels, but she also read books about Marcus Garvey and other informative things. She graduated on time and she chose to go to Morgan State University. She only stayed 2 semesters. Then she found out She was going to have code. So I started looking at different colleges that would allow young mothers to have their children because I wanted her to stay in school. But then she was like, Mom, you know, that's going to be too much. So she directed her attention to her other passion. She got a cosmetology license and started doing hair and makeup, and she enjoyed it. She bought 2 homes as rental properties that she used for income. Oh, she bought her own vehicle. She was independent. After Michael Brown, there was a whole snowball effect of police murders. Freddie Gray was a neighbor of ours. I didn't personally know him, but I knew him from the neighborhood, and it was literally a few blocks away. Everything that unfolded was literally around the corner from where she grew up. That was our community, and our community had been robbed. She was an activist role model, and she wanted to teach because she was self-taught. She just wanted to enlighten the masses about things that were going on around her. Now, she has a few spoken word poems that are out. Oh, she would always do her little rants on Facebook or Instagram about things that were going on in the world. Justice for Corinne. What does it look like? It looks like an officer shouldn't be allowed to make lateral moves within the department if they've had other issues. This was not Royce Ruby's first shooting. Justice for me is getting officers better training, making sure that they adhere to policy and not create new ones as they go along. The officer who shot Corinne was found not guilty because of the statutes of such and such of the police code or this and that. They chose not to indict the officers. In September 2016, an internal police investigation concluded that Officer Ruby, who had previously been involved in a fatal shooting, was justified in shooting Corinne Gaines and would not be charged. He was subsequently promoted. So we went to civil trial. It was February 2nd, 2018. It was 4 white jurors, 2 black jurors who came up with their own settlement amount of $37 million. And they came up with that money based on the information that was presented from evidence. The county appealed, and on February 15th, 2019, the day before the anniversary of the settlement, the judge decided to overturn it based on qualified immunity, which had been on the table 3 times before the trial even started. Well, he did that because he never expected us to win. He never argued for us to have qualified immunity because he didn't expect us to win based on the circumstances around the case. Well, once the jury heard all of the evidence, they came back with $37 million. The jurors. So that says a lot. But needless to say, we're going to appeal. It's not about the money. No. We have to get the truth out there. When they decided to decline criminal charges, they thought we were going to go away. They want us to go away. I just want everybody to know that the fight continues. There is no dollar amount that can remotely replace what we have lost. I can do without the dollars. I want accountability. I want the people involved to be held accountable. I'm going to go out on a limb and speak for all of us and say, I want them to pay. I want them to feel our pain. They need to know. They need to come from behind the wall of protection and be held accountable. That's what I want. Corinne felt like she was in a fight by herself. So she would be so happy that I am continuing her fight. In her last hours, she felt like she was alone because that's the way the stage was set for her to feel alone. And I am going to continue battling for her because she had a message to get out. It wasn't received by everyone in the way that she wanted to present it, but I'm gonna clear it up for her. I am going to clear it up for her.
Yes.
I am going to deliver it the way I know she would want it to be delivered. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. So we're going to be hearing one more excerpt this evening. On September 15, 2015, India Kager was murdered at a 7-Eleven gas station by the Virginia Beach SWAT team, who threw flashbang grenades at the back of her car while her 4-month-old son, Roman Kager, sat in the back seat. She died shortly afterward and was left on the pavement by the side of the road where her body lay overnight. Her 4-month-old son survived, but he lost his hearing in his left ear because of the sounds from the flashbang grenades. Here are the words of Gina Best, mother of India Kager, read by Darlesia Cearcy.
People didn't know what to say to me when India was first killed. They offered words of what they intended to be comfort. You know, God has his plan in this. She's in a better place. And I'm listening to that, and none of that is sitting with me and resonating at all. I'm not on that frequency, and I don't want it. What do you think hurts worse? The silly statements people make, or the silence when they act like they are ignoring it? The stupid statements people make. God has a reason for it. That's one of them. Or the silence when they ignore you altogether and they avoid you like the plague. It's their worst nightmare and they are watching you live through it and they literally don't know what to do. We haven't examined that enough and given ourselves space to speak what may be seen as wrong statements or hurtful statements or painful statements. We haven't been given that platform and permission to use that. If we take it and express our rage, you know, you're an angry black woman or a bitch. Someone asked me, Gina, are you always sad? And I'm like, yeah. And when I say sad, let me explain what I mean by that. You see the triggers on social media. Are you reliving this all the time? I'm like, I will never not live it. Never not live it. This is now a part of us. I hate the part of my life where I felt at one point that it wasn't, where I could not relate to someone having been killed by the police. For that, if anything has come out that I can hold on to is valuable. After the murder of my daughter, I can look at another human, another mother, another father, or child and say, you know what? I do see you. And no one has the right to take your life because you're not in the right place. I don't believe any of our children were in the wrong place. Roman's birthday was May 11th. He's 5 now. He's got complete hearing loss in the left ear from the flashbang. He's disabled as well from the trauma. He's acting out. He's asking for me. He is really full of rage. He is waking up screaming in his sleep. He calls me Mima. I want Mima. I want Mima. Our children are traumatized a lot. And once his brother Evan was in bed, he said, Grandma, I see angels all around. And I'm like, yes, you do. So how I keep them alive, how I keep India alive, is with chimes, wind chimes. One is a butterfly, because I call all my granddaughters butterflies. And there's another one just past the crystals, and there's one with crystals, and just the sounds. I told Evan every time he hears the chimes that it's his mama. She's always there, and he loves it. You heard me say that I walk around with an amputated heart, and that's literally the case.
I envision that when we say her name and we remember, we amplify our beautiful daughters and sisters and queens. I like to imagine India answering back. I like to imagine every last one of our babies, our loved ones, answering back. And I'll imagine a world where not only are we saying their names, but you are all doing it too. Where we're not speaking against the silence. Tell someone, speak their names. It emboldens us. It gives us strength and encouragement in those very lonely times because there are no words to articulate the level of pain that we live with. It's off the spectrum. But we're here. We're here. We're going to do something about this, sisters. It is starting with us, and we won't quit.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Kimberlé Crenshaw, Executive Director of the African American Policy Forum. We're so glad to be joined by so many of you here tonight. I want to begin by highlighting the Say Her Name Mothers Network. This network is made up of an extraordinary group of women. We are lucky to have 3 of them with us here tonight. Please welcome Valarie Carey, sister of Miriam Carey. Come on up, Valarie. Rhanda Dormeus, mother of Corinne Gaines. And Gina Bess, mother of India. So, an important part of the work surrounding the police killings of Black women has been to push back against the utter disregard and dismissal of the bonds that they shared with their families. In the excerpts that we heard, we find out about the life-altering moment when a mother or a sister was informed or callously not informed about the brutal killings of their loved ones. We hear about their fearless advocacy for their sister or their daughter in the aftermath of their deaths. And we get a window into the little things that they remember, that only a sister or a mother can remember, like a daughter's favorite subject in school, or a magical moment of butterflies landing around your sister at Niagara Falls. But all of this doesn't come without cost to the family members of slain women. When we have seen the toll that this has taken on the Say Her Name Mothers Network, we realize that there is a loss, and then often a loss on top of that. Mothers and sisters who lost their lives due to strokes and other stress-related, life-threatening illnesses. We will always remember and honor the lives of Vicki Coles McAdory and Cassandra Johnson, both early members in our Say Her Name Mothers Network, who worked tirelessly to put an end to police violence against Black women. Vicki's niece, India Beatty, who she raised like a daughter, was killed by police in 2016 Cassandra Johnson's daughter, Tanisha Anderson, was killed by police in Cleveland in 2014. At the beginning of this year, our AAPF family also mourned the loss of Amber Carr, the sister of Tatiana Jefferson, and also a dedicated member of our Say Her Name Mothers Network. Amber was an advocate for the lives of Black women everywhere. In fact, just a few weeks before her death, Amber stood before a court and testified about how much her family lost when her sister was killed by a Fort Worth police officer in 2019 in the presence of her son and Tatiana's nephew Zion, now 11. We are reminded over and over again that when Black women are killed by the police, when they are taken from this earth, the hole that is left in their absence is unfillable. For families like Amber's, Vicky's, and Cassandra's, their grief endures, and too often, and sadly, it grows. It was a privilege to know these women in their lives, and an honor to commit the rest of our lives to saying her name until true justice is achieved for women like them and all of the valued and loved members of the Say Her Name Mothers Network. This, in large part, is why the book Say Her Name, Black Women's Stories of Police Violence and Public Silence is so critical, particularly at this current moment. First, the families lose these women. And then the fact that they've lost them becomes lost to their communities, becomes lost to history, becomes lost to the movement. All around the country, we're seeing the consequences of other losses, the erasure of our history, whether it's Governor DeSantis' attacks against African American studies or new social studies standards in the state in which children will be taught that there were benefits to enslavement. All of these are branches of the same tree, a tree whose roots are deeply rotten. We need to ensure that our history and our lives are not forgotten or silenced. The first of many steps in that process is to say her name, to remember the lives of women who have been victims of state violence in this country, and to push back against the public silence that still surrounds their deaths. Now, AAPF has many rituals as we support Say Her Name. One that we revisit each year is to say the names of all the women, girls, and femmes who have been killed at the hands of the police. Each year, we read every name. Last year, we called the name of 178. And to date, that number has unfortunately increased to close to 200. One of our phenomenal artists in residence, Abby Dobson, will now join us to sing a song she wrote for the campaign. If you are able, please stand to join us as we remember some of the lives that have been lost. These names represent the daughters and the sisters of the members of the Mothers Network.
India Kager, say her name. Say her name. Say her name. Corinne Gaines, say her name. Say her name. Say her name. Michelle Cusseaux, say her name. Say her name. Say her name. Kayla Moore, say her name. Say her name. Say her name. Shelly Frey, say her name. Say her name. Say her name. Tanisha Anderson, say her name. Say her name. Say her name. Michelle Shirley, say her name. Say her name. Say her name. Tatiana Jefferson, say her name. Say her name. Say her name. Miriam Carey, say her name. Say her name. Say her name. Leilene Polanco, say her name. Say her name. Say her name. Sandra Bland, say her name. Say her name. Say her name. Breonna Taylor, say her name. Say her name. Say her name. Pamela Turner, say her name. Say her name. Say her name. India Beatty, say her name. Say her name. Say her name. Charlena Wiles, say her name. Say her name. Say her name. Thank you. Please take your seats. Now, Abby will bring us a song that captures the aspirations for a livable future as we transition to our conversation. And I'd like to bring back Kali Holloway, who will be our moderator. Thank you. You know what I wish? You know what I wish? I wish I knew how it would feel to be free.
I wish I could break all the chains holding me. I wish I could say all the things that I should say. Say them loud, say them clear, for the whole round world to hear. I wish I could share all the love that's in my heart. Remove all the bars that keep us apart. I wish you could know what it means to be me. Then you'll see and agree that everyone should be free. I wish I could give all I'm longing to give. I wish I could share all I'm longing to give. Oh, I saw through the sun and look down at the sea. And I sing 'cause I know. Yeah, I sing 'cause I know. Yeah, I sing 'cause I know how it feels to be free. How it feels to be free. How it feels to be free. How it feels. I want us to feel. We need to feel how it is to be free.
Good evening again. Thank you all for being here. Good evening. We're gonna have a conversation now. I'm gonna do some introductions and then we're gonna dive in. I'm gonna start with Kimberlé Crenshaw. Obviously, she's the author of Say Her Name, Black Women's Stories of Police Violence and Public Shame. And she's also the co-founder and executive director of the African American Policy Forum. Valarie Carey, the sister of Miriam Carey. Rhanda Dormeus, the mother of India Kager. And Gina Best, the mother of Corinne Gaines. India's my favorite. India's It's nice to meet all of you. So I feel like there are two kind of conflicting ways in which police violence against Black women, girls, and femmes are treated. So on the one hand, there's a deafening silence. And then on the other, there are these narratives, right, that grotesquely kind of distort and flatten. And I feel like the Say Her Name Mothers Network, one of the aspects of the work that it does is that it gives us a full picture of the person who this actually was, right? Instead of the abstraction that we so often get. And it feels, because that is a work of kind of grounding, I think, it feels important right now to do that here with just our location. The fact that we are sitting here in Washington, D.C., that happens to be a place that intersects with all three of their lives. So India was born here. Randallstown, which is near Baltimore, is where Corinne lived and where her life was snatched from her. And then not very far from here, Miriam was killed. So we are sitting, this is not abstract, right? We are sitting in a geography of violence. There has been bloodshed here. We are amongst it. And I just kind of like to, I think it's easy for us to kind of not get a sense of the ways in which we sit amidst this. It's also the 10-year anniversary of Miriam's death. And I just wanted to talk about where the case is and sort of the heaviness of that anniversary.
So the heaviness is it's 10 years without having justice. Currently, the case has been closed for the past 9.5 years. The case was closed within months of the incident, citing that there wasn't enough evidence to prove that the officers willfully took actions that took my sister's life, but there is more than enough evidence that proves that wrong. So coming up on 10 years of not having transparency in the case, it weighs heavy on my heart. My mom is no longer here to see the work that is being done to try to get the justice for my sister. And I really can't articulate more how I'm feeling sitting in DC, so close to the anniversary of Miriam's death.
And that theme of the lack of justice, I think is generally, that is the story, right? It's not that there are rare cases, it's that almost all of the time we see this lack of justice. There's no criminal indictments in any of these cases. And then Gina, I wanted to talk about, in India's case, the difficulty of not knowing the full story because of how many officers were involved, and also the diminishment of even, I mean, often the closest that we get to seeing anything that looks like justice is in a civil court. And so the lack of even what would be called civil justice in this case.
Okay, first, thank you all for coming to share this sacred space with us. I want to say that because each one of our daughters and our loved ones, their names are sacred as their lives were. They murdered my baby in Virginia Beach, which you all know is one of the bedrocks of slavery. White supremacy, hatred, misogyny, you name it all, what they've done to us. And the fact that there were 16 plus trained SWAT officers, you want to call them that? They were mercenaries, they were Neanderthal murderers. And there was nothing done. And even to this day, living with that realization that I will never know, well, we know why, but that their mothers are hurting the same way we do, the same way we are. Living with that and having to try to balance that and reconcile it is, there's no words for it. It's beyond shameful, beyond egregious. And I'm sorry, I want to make sure I'm answering your question. What was your question? Well, I can talk all day. I can talk forever, y'all. Okay, literally. I can scream and shout and cuss and all, the whole thing. Okay.
Can you, I mean, I guess talk a little bit about how that looked, the diminishment of the civil, because the actual, a lot of folks don't know this sort of actual story, and I think some of those details would be worth you.
Well, I'm going to present to you all civil case in a society that is most uncivil towards us. Okay, let's sit with that for just a moment. And the fact that we are still witnessing to this day, and we're steps away from the seat of government. Miriam killed right here in DC, Rhanda right there in Baltimore, 20 odd miles, my daughter born here, murdered in Virginia. It's beyond shameful. Because one thing that they'll always say is there's no place for racism here. They say that about corporate, but there has never been an instance where we as Black people have ever had positive relationships, if you want to call it that, with the police. Not one instance in history, not one. And that's perpetuated. I believe they also secretly celebrate it because it keeps us, quote unquote, in our place where we are fraught with unspeakable, crushing grief that they know that they've inflicted upon us for generations. So what that does as a Black woman here in communion with Black women, Black sons and men who are born from Black women, it causes an unfettered rage to well up within me. I'm no longer ashamed to be called an angry Black woman. I embrace that. Because I'm an angry Black woman, of a Black woman who was murdered by police, Neanderthals, who didn't even deem her life worthy of living, and the baby was in the car. They were fully aware of that. They were cognizant of that. So there's no more excuses about we don't have racism. There's no places in here. It was, this whole United States government was constructed upon racism. So I want them to stop lying and stop giving us empty platitudes and trying to placate us with these so-called Band-Aids over festering wounds that will never end, that will never heal, ever. And I'm sorry, you guys, we're here.
See, I think you touched upon something though very real when you talk about what are the roots of this, right? What is policing historically meant, and what is it in particular meant for Black bodies, right? And,
Yes.
and how is that conspicuous in the way that we are policed today?
I mean, 2 weeks ago, a young woman murdered in her car. She's pregnant. You think he didn't know? Of course he knew. So what it does, it places us in those of us, in a precarious position where we're trying to walk a thin line, where over here is going to be pass me on, because I literally, I'm thinking so many swirling thoughts because my mind and the emotions, it's hard to balance the two because I find that I no longer want to be be dignified, if you want to call it that, or even apologize for the emotions that we are forced to feel. I no longer want to apologize for that. I embrace every single bit of it because India, Kyam, and Rhanda were murdered, ironically, Miriam, in front of their children, India. All three of us, our babies, Miriam's niece was with her, her daughter.
And again,
no regard for
Professor Crenshaw writes about this in the book, but this idea, there is no, for Black women, womanhood is not protection, right? We never get to be damsels in distress. There is no one looking at mothers and saying that their lives should be salvaged because they are mothers when they are Black women, right? Right. Because truly, as a Black mother, it's not only just not embraced, it's really never really been fully acknowledged by them. Literally never has been the case. We're property. And I'm actually because you talk about the silence around the killing of Black women's girls and femmes, but you don't just say that there's an issue that's a problem, right? Like, we didn't just get here. There is a larger context in which our lives and our existences are erased. So there's a lot of this in the book, but can you kind of describe that, the larger contextualization of that erasure?
Yeah. Well, the excerpt from the book that was read tonight really goes to the core reality of Black women's existence here. We are absolutely central to the very possibility of this republic. and we're absolutely expendable at the same time. And that has been the contradiction in which we've lived our lives from the time we arrived on these shores. That ideology that makes that possible, that says the wealth of the nation comes from our wombs, what made that possible is not seeing us as mothers, not valuing and validating the relationships we have with our children, seeing us essentially as breeding bodies has not been substantially interrupted. We haven't really remembered the fact of that. We haven't really interrogated what made that possible. We haven't really named all of the stereotypes and ideologies and ways in which we were called that allowed that to sustain itself over centuries. It happened longer than it didn't happen. We are in just the shadow of it. We're not in the deep, far in the future. That stuff happened like yesterday. So when we wonder how it is possible for 16 police officers to follow a mother and her child for hours and then decide that in pursuit of whatever they thought they were going to do, they were going to just decimate that car and everyone in it.
Even though they had opportunities.
Many opportunities to de-escalate, knowing there's a mother and child there. We don't have to know anything more than that story to know how we are still held in this society. That's all we need to know. And then to hear it happen again and again, and then 2 weeks ago, what else is there to say about where we exist in America's imagination than what we are learning about the way that our bodies are stolen from us and our lives are stolen from our families? That's it, and that's all of it, until we decide that that cannot be all there is. That's what Taylor is.
And again, I want to locate us not just in this room, but in DC, obviously, because the irony of the fact that we are here in the seat of our nation's government, while a major legislative convention happens, is that this conversation is one that's being overlooked there, right? So I'm open this to anyone. Why is this, how is this, is there a conspicuous sort of effort that we're saying to look the other way? Why is there not a legislative remedy that's been presented? How is it that you are not seeing this? Because it's happening over and over again. We are not invisible. Why has there not been any sort of legislative remedy? Let's speak to that. Why? And obviously part of that is political will, right? It's the desire to do something.
I mean, first of all, they have to look at us as humans.
Right.
You know, all of our girls, I think for them, were just objects, you know, and they took no regard in the fact that we all had grandchildren with their mothers when they were gunned down. My grandson was actually shot twice by this officer who shot my daughter in her back through a wall after he claimed that she was aiming a gun at him. How can you shoot her in the back if she's aiming a gun at you? The legal system just offers women no grace, not an ounce of grace. You know, we're the mothers of creation. We bring life. And all they do is look at how to take it. You know, we're broken. And I know I can speak for all of us. We're broken, and some days it's difficult for us to even to get out of the bed. You know, it's constant pain. And I don't even know what to say about the legal system because it's so broken and so, well, no, it's not broken. It's doing what it's designed to do. But in my eyes, it's broken because they don't regard us. That's all. They don't regard us. They have no love, you know. So.
And I want to speak to the quote unquote leadership because we actually, from the civil rights, there was always a person who was in the forefront, the leader that everyone else was so-called looking up to. But I propose that each one of us, we are the leaders. We don't have to necessarily, the challenge is finding that place of authenticity where you find someone in the political arena who really does truly care and who wants to do something about it. Even at the expense of so-called being voted out of office or whatever, no one wants that. They get so comfortable with their place where they really are willing to disregard or whisper, oh, what about that? Oh, we're just going to tuck that away. We're not going to talk about that. And where, honestly, and Dr. Kim said that they're partying, where we are literally still suffering day by day. It is beyond difficult to pick yourself up, to try to ascend every day when you realize the murderers of your child are still walking free. They get to go home. They get to watch their children and their grandchildren, where we live precariously in a situation where it takes very little for us just to crumble. And one of the things that you said in your testimony that really struck me was that you feel so much distance from the person who didn't think that it was possible that it could potentially, right? That you could lose someone, that a life could be, a life that you love could be snatched from you by police violence. And I think that we all have a tendency, no matter how much we are conscious and thinking about issues, to distance ourselves, right? It's a survival mechanism. It is, but there is a way that we sort of think that it is, that's the kind of thing that happens to someone else. It's what the phrase that you use is "but for." But the "but for" factor, and certainly the "but for" factor in each one of our beautiful daughters and Miriam and her sister, is that but for the police, they would still be here. But it's deeper than that. But for the ideology that they held in terms of their supremacy for us, over us. Okay, so there's so much to that it speaks to a willful and convenient amnesia. It's willful. And it's also, I can talk, I'm just gonna listen. Because y'all just have to know, when you go through this, and to answer your question, there was once upon a time where I didn't think about these types of things. It couldn't happen to my baby. She's all of these things, and we have all the accoutrement, and all of those things now mean nothing. I want her back. I want the fact that even if India could come back today, what kind of world is this? It's the same world that took her and her two boys and Miriam's niece and Cody and Corinne and Carson. It's the same. What are we going to really do about that? And who's to be held accountable? Each one of us. But we have to start stepping on some toes and saying, listen, y'all not doing anything over there in Capitol Hill. We want something done. If anytime you can send, almost 100 billion to Ukraine, I'm going to go there, okay? You're going to 100 billion, and we still don't have health care, and we don't even have a law to protect us. I mean, it's a stroke of a pen. I know they're not blind, but they choose to be. Mm-hmm. And I think in looking at the larger picture, this fits in, I draw a direct line from the need for the Say Her Name Mothers Network and the attacks that we're seeing on Black folks, on women, on Black women, on LGBTQ folks, this attempt to, DeSantis we brought up, but really specifically this using, it isn't critical race theory, but that is how they have mislabeled it and successfully created this scaremongering campaign. How it is a general attack on the progress that's been made. It's a regressive movement to take us back to another era, but it's also a way of pushing back on multiracial democracy and the promise of that. And I think you do a really fantastic job of contextualizing that within as well. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think it is no accident that the juggernaut that is anti-wokeism, anti-CRT, anti-anything that is progressive came after the tremendous mobilization that happened in 2020 after the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. If we know our history, and they don't want us to, every time there was a possibility of a major transformative bottom-up moment, there has been a backlash. And the backlash has often been more powerful and more enduring than the preceding thing that caused it. So 2020, more mass mobilization than any time in history. Every corporation out there had to say, we stand with Black people. Every foundation was writing a check. Every celebrity wanted to be on the right side of this issue. Oh, it was going to happen. It was transformative. Everybody was on it. That thing scared the bejesus out of people. And what scared them the most was seeing their young folks, and by their I mean white kids, not realizing that they're not supposed to be putting their lives on the line for us. They're not supposed to be marching in the streets demanding that the police be held accountable. The police are for us. What are you doing? What's happening? So there had to be some explanation for this. What is responsible for the fact that these young people don't seem to understand what side of the line they're supposed to be on? It must be what they're learning in schools. It must be these ideas that they've been exposed to. It must be anti-racism. It must be critical race theory. It must be implicit bias. It must be structural racism. So if that is the problem, then our solution is we're just going to suppress that mess. We're going to take it out of the schools. We're going to take it out of federal government. We're going to take it out of corporations. We're going to take it out of circulation. Now, where have we seen this kind of response before? When Nat Turner decided, you know what, I'm going to take some people out. Denmark recently. Whenever there was a revolt, whenever there was a possibility, whenever we actually really got power and exercised it, like Reconstruction maybe. So Reconstruction lasted, what, 12 years? They've been beating our asses about that ever since. Lost cause comes from their reaction to the possibility of a multiracial society. They don't even call it multiracial. They call it Negro rule. When we share power, that means that they're being dominated. So the reaction to Reconstruction, look, after the last, I said this the other day, after the last Black representative resigned in 1901, he was the last one from Reconstruction. We didn't have another one for 70 years. 70 years. This is all in reaction to 10 years. So if that's what we got after Reconstruction, 10 years of that, imagine what we're getting now after 2020 when everybody was out. Everybody was saying this was intolerable. So what we're dealing with now is retrenchment. We're dealing with reaction. We're dealing with an entire juggernaut of money and organizations with the complicity of organizations like the College Board, complicity of organizations like publishers who want to now take racism out of the book so that authors are giving their text back to say, we want to publish you, but as long as you're using the word racism, we can't do it. This is all bowing and bending to the demands of the DeSantises, the MAGA Republicans.
And it looks exactly like what the United Daughters of the Confederacy did. I mean, this is
Nothing is new. The only new part of the equation is that we are now able to see the pattern. We know how this story ends. So we don't have to ask ourselves, well, should we fight back? Well, if we throw them under the bus, are we going to be good? No, we're not going to be good. It's not about a few of us, and it's not about a couple of letters called CRT, and not a couple of ideas called structural racism. It's about the condition of our lives. It's about whether inequality and racism matters anymore. It's about whether we can talk about this stuff, whether we can gather and say her name. They're trying to shut it all down, every last bit of it. So it's not time for us to be negotiating, not time for us to be dithering, not time for us to be saying, oh, I wonder if we just say, okay, we're not going to teach this, that, and the other, they'll be good with us. They are not going to be good as long as we demand to be treated like humans. That's what this is about. So, you know, this is really at the core of what they don't want. So of course they're going to kill us and think that we're going to be quiet about it. We're not going to be quiet about it. And as long as we refuse to allow our tongues to be ripped out of us, we're going to be a problem for them. So let us be a problem.
No more kumbaya. No more kumbaya. I'm over kumbaya.
So I'm looking at the time and realizing that we were going to take a few questions. I don't think we have a ton of time for it, but 15 minutes or so.
Hi, I really don't have a question. What I'd like to say to these family members is I want to thank you so much for your courage and your bravery to come here and be in a public forum in something that is so personal, so hurtful, and to lend yourself so that your loved ones could be lifted up. I am humbled by your presence here tonight and your courage and bravery. So thank you so much for coming.
Are there other folks that had questions?
Good evening. I am the executive director of a Black-led, Black women-centered organization called Soul to Soul Sisters. So I come here to receive so I can take back to the community the language that we need in order to continue the fight, to continue to center Black women and Black femmes and Black thems. So my question to you is, as I am honored to take this book home with me and to continue to say her name, what are some other things that we can do in the Black community to galvanize beloveds, to let them know how powerful they are and how divine they are, and how if we come together, we have everything we need except each other. So what are some things that we can do to take back to community, to continue to build community and fight this fight?
Well, I would say don't be afraid to use your voice. You know, silence to me is complicit. And particularly for us women fighting, we need more women and men to stand on the forefront with women like us, you know, because we're in danger. That's period. We're in danger. So we just need to collaborate. We need people to join forces. We need people to know that we need support, you know.
Okay, Doctor just reminded me this thing about the correlation between rape culture, that our daughters, again, this miscommunication, I'm trying to think of another word, that they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, they must have deserved it, they somehow did something, and all that we hear all the time, yada, 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 yada. And the question is, where are Black women safe? If we are not safe in our own homes, and I'm going to say this, our own work environments where we have to even fight just to wear locks. I'm so glad I locked the best thing I could have ever done. But in the corporate environment, I never did. I tried to assimilate. So I would say this, no more assimilation. Okay? None. We literally embrace everything about our femininity, our Black, femme, trans, that, and then also, there is a quote by one of my favorite authors. She studied hoodoo, and I'm okay. That's another story. Okay, I know I'm a hoodoo. All right. Florida Hurston said, "If I am silent about my pain, I'm not afraid. They will kill me and say that I enjoyed it." But let me flip that, dear family, on something. We can no longer be silent about our pain. They're depending on us to be silent about our pain. And when we're not, like speaking of CRT, making sure our children know where they came from, that they're queens and kings, royal, something to be proud of, that nothing can be taken away from them, okay? When we flip that script and reclaim our narrative and no longer let them write the story to our history, our books, our lived experience, we become more empowered in ways that, again, will frighten the bejesus. They need to have the bejesus frightened out of them. As a matter of fact, I hold a lot of faith in this next generation coming up because we do see a turn. Again, like Dr. Kim said, I'm going to echo her, 2020, they were scared, all right? But we've always been afraid. We've always walked around with what do you want to call it, target on our foreheads. All right, so what happens when we start flipping that? Okay? Say, no, I won't bow down to that. So dear sister, dear queen, and the one in the back, thank you all. Thank all of you all right? But please, no more silence. Because there's no such thing as dirty laundry. We live every day with bloodstains. Every single day. You can very much.
You should talk about.
So to echo Gina and being silent and what you can do, definitely when you see something, an atrocity, sometimes we see something in the news and then it's like, oh well, whatever happened to that case? You have to be politically involved because the people that are actually, help me out, what's the word I'm looking for? The people that are actually doing the wrong things to us, that are in these public offices, that are allowing police forces to behave in the way that they are behaving, we actually elect those individuals. And I find it ironic that we're talking about this today. We're launching the Say Her Name book now in DC where my sister was killed. And on the day that she was killed, Congress was in session. And they stood on the Congress floor and applauded her death when they heard, I don't want to say assailant, but whatever adjective they used to describe my sister at the time, who was an innocent woman. But Congress stood on the floor and applauded. So those people, we need to hold them to task. You have the ability to make a phone call, to write an email, and to ask that Miriam's case is reopened, but other cases like hers, you can make the inquiries and you can put the pressure on your public official. When it's coming from one person, they kind of ignore it, but when multiple people put pressure on those that you voted into office, they have to respond.
They rely on complacency.
Well, I'll just say, some of you have seen, so these are our sweatshirts. They have the names of Black women who've been killed by the police, but it's a word puzzle. Why? Because their names are not going to stand out. They're not the names that we hear when we go marching and protesting. You're going to have to look for it. So take that as a metaphor for what needs to happen to bring Black women into the center of how we even imagine anti-racism. It's not just anti-Black police violence, it's anti-Blackness itself. We have not had a fully gendered account about how anti-Blackness actually works. Right. And so that means we're always having to play catch up. We're always having to say, okay, this is the way it happens to some of us, and this is how it happens to others of us. And all of this has to be part of our commitment to fight against anti-Black racism. And it's not an afterthought. It's not something we should apologize for. It's not something that we should say, oh, we're interloping into what the real deal is. The real deal is what's happening to all of us. And so if we keep that in mind as we move forward, knowing we have to work at it, knowing we have to look at it, knowing we're going to change the narratives that we have received about what anti-Black racism looks like. So that's one of the reasons that the entire campaign started with trying to look at all of the different circumstances under which these family members lost their loved ones and create frames around it, because frames help people recognize something. So we know what happens when a police officer is following a car that's a late model car with a Black person in it. And we tell the rest of that story because it's so familiar to us. Right. But we don't really have the rest of the story when a family dials 911 because their loved one is having a mental crisis. We haven't really fully told the rest of that story. So it's just reading, seeing, becoming literate, making a commitment to ourselves to fill in those gaps that we did not get from our history books, from the media, and unfortunately sometimes from our own civil rights movement. Yeah. We have the resources, we just have to have the commitment to use them. Yes.
And Nalbo has a question.
Yep, Nalbo has a question. Hi. So my name is Shelly Frey, and I am an attorney. It's in private practice, but now I'm in the government, part of your office. So one of the things that I see and experience is that, racism is on a spectrum. So today we're talking about, actual death. But as professionals, we also suffer a mental and physical death in the jobs that we have. The lady was talking about us assimilating. But everything, right? Everything that's happening is connected to history. These are structural issues. There's structural issues why the police will feel like, yes, I can stay on your neck because we had laws in the 1600s that allowed any white person to apprehend a black person just on them thinking that you were enslaved. How do we continue to turn the lens around and stop the narrative from being, well, what did this person do? Was it a fake $20 bill? Did they talk back? They didn't comply, to only looking at the action of a system that is built and upholds white supremacy.
And let me just add to that please know that half the time when you're reading an article about the police and an officer-involved shooting, which is the euphemism that they use, that most of the time it's, or a lot of the time, they are reprinting a police press release. Yeah. So, but this idea that, you were running too fast, that was suspicious. You were walking too slow, that was suspicious. I mean, it's the victim blaming is endless.
You know what? Here's what I think now, after 2020. It's really not a matter of how do we, because we have the tools to do that. That's what the concept of structural racism is that you just talked about. We have the tools to identify the continuity in law's ability to ratify the ability of police officers to do anything they basically want to do to us and get away with it. It's simply the continuation of the idea that we are supposed to perform subservience, and if we don't, it's a legitimate reason to kill us. This is a continuity from enslavement. The issue now isn't, gee, why is that happening? As you analyze, we know why it's happening. The problem now is that the frameworks that we are using to identify that, to connect those histories, to teach our children how to survive these encounters, they're going after them and trying to keep us from actually speaking the truth that we know into the environment so that we can actually change these things. So the fight now isn't so much how do we speak it or how do we frame it, it's how do we protect the speaking and the framing that we've already created. I mean, this comes from blood, right? Our knowledge comes from survival and sometimes not. And now the idea is just to pull the plug on it. So my struggle is more with us, with people who know that what we are talking about and the lives that we have lived and the knowledge, the Black wisdom that comes from a society that we weren't meant to survive. They know what this knowledge is about and still think we can negotiate our way out of their effort to censor, suppress, and erase. So it's an internal fight that I think we're having right now. We gotta get on the same page with this. We gotta say and say, you're not protecting us, and you're not stepping up for us, and you are not for us, and we will see you in the election polls.
And so we have to wind down. I think we're going to have a book signing, but I want to make sure that before we.
I do want to say something. I want to thank Dr. Kim and the whole AAPF because a lot of us wouldn't have a voice if it weren't for them uplifting us to the point where we had the courage. Because this takes courage. You know, we are reopening wounds every time we have to address this publicly. But Dr. Kim and the whole AAPF, they love us. They love on us, and they afford us the opportunity to feel like we're safe to share. And they share it as well. So it's not just us. So I just want to thank you. Really thank you.
And I just want to thank all of you for being here. I want to thank the actors.
Dr. Malvo. Dr. Malvo.
Oh, Dr. Malvo.
Yes.
I have a short question. First, I want to thank the mothers, especially you, sister, because you fierce. for being so transparent. I do radio Monday mornings on WPFW, and whenever I have a woman-centered conversation, invariably, a brother will call and say, what about the men? They don't think about the number of times they've had all male conversations throughout history. So first, it's refreshing to have this woman-centered conversation. But secondly, I would, Kim, especially you, because you've done such great work on intersectionality, and I see some great brothers here. What about the men? What is their role in stopping the violence against Black women? If my brothers, Mark Morial and NAACP fellow, if every time they said George Floyd, they also said Breonna Taylor. They didn't do that. We swallowed that. You know, so if my brothers would consider our lives equal to theirs, because see, some of this is internally in the Black community. They consider our lives as important, then you would never have a conversation that just stopped George Floyd. So can you and the others, what's the role of men here, and how can we wake the Durham brothers up?
I'm not so sure about the Margaret. Women need to stop tripping, number one. When I say that, I mean stop tripping, or the woman's place is to serve me, or to be subservient, or, you know, I want to, what's the word? Say that again? Submissive. Okay, submissive. Think about that. Anytime someone says you must submit, something inside of you dies. Submit to what? Another human being? So, okay, and that's, I love that question, because anytime there's a gathering, usually it's the mothers or the sisters. You all don't see the brothers or anything, and they're existing in our family, yet they're not here. I'm not in any way attacking them, but it's reality. We can see it for ourselves, okay? So that leads to another question as to why aren't our brothers here? I wish I had an answer to that. I wish that we could, my son, who was in law enforcement, said he had to get out of that, because the last sound he ever heard, when he realizes he could not put on the belt, you know, thank you, was because the last sound his sister ever heard were guns being fired at her. But so was the baby. Okay, so was an innocent man who was in that car. So that is deep. I'm going to defer for just a moment, because I'm going to sit with that, because I have a whole lot to say, but I don't want to start cussing up here. Okay. No, I'm just, because it's past infuriating. We have to fight as women just to be seen. It was 1920 when they just got the right to vote, but that was for white women. What about Black women? They co-opted even the feminism movement. Just for a moment, okay? It was co-opted by white women. And okay, I gotta say something about Dr. Kim. She had to carve out a space for Black women who are killed by police too. Because it wasn't being acknowledged. Everybody knew about my crime, but what about Michelle Cusseaux? What about so many, 100? What about the women? She had to carve
carve that out. And even with that, they still tried to co-opt that and make it for all women domestic violence. I'm not saying that in any way invalidating the importance of it, the import of that, because it is key. But it also speaks, these women are being harmed by who? Men. Y'all need to stop tripping, brothers, and get it together and really start thinking about, wait a minute, what is my role here? What can I really do to protect my sisters, my daughters, my mothers, my cousins, my aunties? What can I really do? And I would like to, I'm gonna just plant the seed in you all's mind. Please don't do what I did. I had to awaken from my complacency because it couldn't touch me. I'm an educated Black woman. This is my daughter's never going to be murdered until I got that phone call. Wow. It can happen, and it does happen. And what'd you say, hon? No one. I know Valarie wants to say something.
No one is exempt. And I live in Brooklyn, born and bred, and I have nephews, and I would speak to my nephews about what to do when stopped by police. I am a retired NYPD sergeant and never feared for my sister's life because you don't think that your sisters are in harm's way or that it can happen to them. And I've never could have imagined in a million years that my sister would be killed by the police. So it definitely can happen to anyone. To answer Dr. Melgo's question, I say that more women have to pull on the coattails of men because women are always at the forefront of all movements. We are the ones that rally the cries for the ones that have been unjustly killed, and the men stand with us. But we have to ask them to stand with us for women. We have to ask them to stand in the front.
Don't ask.
Don't
ask.
So we could keep talking for hours. The book signing is going to start soon. I want to hand it over. You have a few things to explain.
But first, let's go ahead and stand up for these incredible speakers. For those in the audience, if you're going to be getting a book tonight or getting it signed, so both of us, we're going to have the line start at Nathan. Nathan, please raise your hand. Thank you. And then it's going to wrap around the mural wall. We have Q who's going to be helping us out. You see him right here. And E, he's going to be helping us out at the door. So, if we can make this as seamless as possible, that would be beautiful. But before you do, thank you all for coming tonight. It was a pleasure seeing you.
And before people go, I want to thank Busboys and Poets for hosting us.